What is up, everybody? I am HoopsandHipHop, and welcome back to another episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. In last week's episode, we sort of did a follow-up to the episode from the previous week, and we talked about Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes, things they need to have, things that would be amazing, but are also really obtainable and they're reasonable to include in the game as well. If you did not catch that one, I definitely recommend it. It was a fun one. Today's also going to be a fun one, because when is it not a fun one, and when do I not ever say that it's going to be an interesting one? That's like the catchphrase of this podcast. You always got to start with, it's going to be interesting, guys. Welcome to my show. It's wonderful. We have a good time. But yeah, today is really going to be actually cool. I'm not just saying that, because I am going to tell you guys why your least favorite Pokemon game, whatever that may be, is actually way better than you think it is. And this is actually a discussion that I've been wanting to have for a while. I almost made a video about it on my own channel, kind of decided not to, but then I realized earlier this week that, hey, this would make for a fantastic discussion topic for a podcast. So that is what we are going to talk about today. Before we get into it, though, as always, we've got to thank the people that make this possible. Without them, we wouldn't really be able to do this. So with that being said, today's video, or today's podcast, is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. The team of professionals at the Tax Defense Group are passionate about helping taxpayers resolve their tax debt. Their services include basic tax preparation, tax audits, resolving large tax debt, and more. They actively represent taxpayers throughout the entire USA. If you need help resolving your tax issues, contact the Tax Defense Group. Call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Writer Junkie. Are you thinking about starting a business or a side hustle? For all businesses to be successful, you need a website. Writer Junkie offers website development, content writing, and SEO services for business websites. Call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. We also recently launched our website, ucaststudios.com. It's got articles about sports, special interest topics, and more. We've got some really cool stuff on there, and it's really well-made website, if I do say so myself. So be sure to check that out as well if you're interested in what we do here at ucaststudios.com. Once again, I just want to personally just thank everyone. Thank all those people for sponsoring the show and making all this possible. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the topic. So how is your least favorite Pokemon game actually better than you think it is? Like, who am I to say that whatever Pokemon game you like the least is actually way better than you think it is, and you're wrong? Well, that's not quite what I'm going for with this. You guys will sort of see the message I'm trying to get across with this conversation as we go along, but I want to, even though I'm directing this at you guys specifically and individually, I am speaking from a personal perspective, a personal experience, I guess you could say, that I also believe that every one of us as Pokemon fans could have, or probably has had, if you just take the time to kind of think about it and realize it. So basically, I am going to give you guys, or tell you guys about my experience, tell you guys about my thoughts in this own topic, and how I came to realize that my least favorite Pokemon games were actually way better than I thought. And I think you guys will you guys will be able to sort of think about it and apply it to your own just personal opinions, and maybe realize yourself that, hey, like, that game I actually don't like so much isn't actually such a bad game after all. So that's what we're doing. Ultimately, it does just come down to personal opinion at the end of the day. I'm not trying to say that your least favorite Pokemon game is good and you're wrong or anything like that. It's, once again, it's just a personal, I guess it's a personal exercise, if you will, just a sort of a thought experiment to really just show and just talk about how well the Pokemon games are actually made and how much thought and effort goes into them, that is something that I have sort of become even more attuned to recently, especially with developing my own personal like Pokemon region project, Pokemon Cardinal. For the people who already know my channel and are familiar with that, I'm sort of making my own Pokemon region and sort of making it as if it was an actual game. And that has sort of given me a little bit of a window into what it is like, I guess, in a sense, to develop a Pokemon game. And it gave me just an amazing appreciation for how well the developers at Game Freak do, because just to develop good quality Pokemon and characters and all that stuff, it is hard. Like, to get it to the level that we are accustomed to and that is literally the standard for Pokemon, it's so hard. And they've put it out generation after generation. And so I've really just grown to appreciate all the hard work that Game Freak does. Obviously, not every single decision they make is going to sit well with every single person, but they really do an amazing job. And this is kind of sort of just an exercise in taking a step back and realizing how much they actually have done and how good of a job they are doing, to the point where even with the games that you like the least, even with the ones that you might have even thought are bad at one point, or maybe you think that right now, there is still like so much good in that particular title that you hate or dislike or whatever. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that to people's attention today and just show how good the Pokemon games really are, to the point where even the one you like the least is actually really good. So, with that being said, in my personal experience, if I had to like choose what my two least favorite generations, or I guess Pokemon games, have been to this point, I would say it was Black and White, specifically Black and White 1, and Sun and Moon. So Gens 5 and 7 are the ones that I liked the least. When it came to Gen 5, I have basically the same problems with Gen 5 that everyone else does. It's a very divisive generation. You either love it or you hate it. Basically, a lot of the Pokemon are just like not good designs, and it just is. I mean, that is basically the biggest issue with Gen 5. For me, personally, and for a lot of other people, is that the Pokemon designs are just not that good overall. That is the prevailing theme of Generation 5. But then there's a lot of other things, like it's like super isolated, and it just kind of feels like for me personally, you always hear that classic argument that, oh, Game Freak is running out of ideas, blah, blah, blah. And I've always been a super, like, loyal Pokemon fan, obviously. So I've never, ever bought into that. Always thought it was just a bunch of just garbage. It was a garbage argument or whatever. Like, people just didn't know what they were talking about, essentially, when they made that argument. But when Generation 5 came around, and I ran into the likes of Herdier and Lillipup and just a bunch of other Unova Pokemon, that thought, for the first time, actually started to creep into my head legitimately. Like I was thinking in the back of my mind, I was like, oh gosh, are they running out of ideas? Is it finally happening? Like, is this finally becoming a true statement? Is this no longer like crazy? Is it actually happening? And that's kind of when I knew that Gen 5 was going to be problematic for me in that way, because that thought actually creeped into my head. The thought that is just the ultimate Gen 1er like garbage argument actually sort of came into my head as a possibility as a hardcore Pokemon fan. And so that was definitely the biggest issue with Gen 5 for me, and it sort of just soured everything else that it had to offer in a lot of ways. Because the Pokemon are sort of the name of the game. Like, you play new Pokemon games to find the new Pokemon. Obviously, you've got all the other stuff along the way, like you've got characters and story and stuff like that, but you really do play to find the new Pokemon, to see what new Pokemon are out there. So when that was kind of just like ruined for me, there was only so much I could do to enjoy the rest of the game. I remember at the time thinking that, like I said, the isolation of it all, the fact that there were no, like, returning Pokemon in the main story, and you had to use the ones that were given to us. At the time, that was sort of a bummer. And that's why Black and White 2 was, like, so refreshing, because you got to use some of your old favorites, because they added them in. But for Black and White, that was a big bummer at the time. Although, we'll get into this later, like, I understand why it was a thing, and I can appreciate why it was a thing back then. Because at the time, when Black and White came out, I was, like, 15, so, I mean, I was still a teenager, a relatively young teenager, I didn't know what was going on, so, like, I couldn't really appreciate some of those finer details, and that's what this whole conversation is about, is, like, looking back and appreciating those finer details that maybe you didn't have the ability to appreciate when you first encountered these games that you don't like. So, big problem for me with Gen 5 was Pokemon, and then secondary was just isolation and just a lot of the design choices, I guess you could say, just really rubbed me the wrong way. When it came to Alola, though, Alola was sort of the same way, just in a different vein. First off, the Alola region obviously is based on Hawaii, so it's very tropical. And I am not a guy who particularly loves tropical environments. So, I mean, I obviously don't hate them. Like, how are you gonna hate a place as beautiful as Hawaii? Like, that's impossible. But like, in terms of just like a video game setting, and even just like in real life, like as a place to just like spend my time and live, I am much more a guy that wants to be in just like a sort of a rugged, like, mountainous, just, I don't know, rural type of area, if that makes sense. Like the regions of Johto and Sinnoh and, let's see, even like Kalos. All those appeal to me much, much more geographically speaking, because they are more land-based as opposed to like water-based. They don't have that tropical vibe that, say, Alola and like Hoenn does, for instance. They've got mountains, they've got cold weather. That's another thing I really, really like, is cold and ice and snow, which you really only get in limited amounts in the tropical regions for Pokemon. So basically, it's just like that kind of setting is like the antithesis of my personal preference. So while I don't hate it, and like it's something that I can like experience, enjoy, and I'm fine like giving it a go, it's not my favorite. It's not my first choice right off the bat. So that's reason number one why I'm not really into Alola as much. Reason number two does have to do with the Pokemon. Or I guess I should say, I should backtrack. All of these things that I'm talking about in terms of like my criticisms or my dislikes about these two regions, this is all coming from basically my initial point of view. This doesn't necessarily represent my current thinking, because we're going to get into my current thinking a little later. That's the whole point of this. But right now I'm just talking about what my first just gut reactions, my thoughts, my first like conclusion about these generations were before I had this epiphany of like, holy crap, there's a lot to appreciate here. So I just want to make that clear. I don't necessarily think like what I don't necessarily have the same opinions that I'm talking about right now. These were just my former opinions. But with that said, the Pokemon in this generation, they kind of had the same issue that Gen 5's Pokemon did, just in a different way. So with Gen 5, it was just like, I felt like there was a lot of really bad Pokemon, and it just felt almost as if they were running out of ideas. This generation, I didn't feel like they were running out of ideas, but it felt like there were a lot of really weird, strange Pokemon. And I attributed that to the tropical theme, because when you're dealing with a tropical exotic area, it only makes sense to have tropical exotic Pokemon. So I didn't necessarily blame Game Freak for it, because it just fit the area that they were working with, but it just added on to the idea that I really didn't like the tropical setting. There were Pokemon like, I don't know, there's just a bunch of Pokemon in Alola, or I thought so at the time, that were just kind of just out there, that were a little more strange, and I just wasn't a fan. And when we got the starter leaks that ultimately proved to be true, but like we didn't know at the time, we all assumed they were fake, because how are the final evolutions of the starter Pokemon going to get leaked? I was like so against all of them. I was like, there's no way these are real. These are all awful and terrible. They better not be real, because these are just bad. And ultimately they came true, which was another reason why I grew to not like Alola so much, because like if you don't like any of the final evolutions of the starter Pokemon, or any of the starter Pokemon in general, it becomes kind of hard to like the region as a whole, or the generation, because the starter Pokemon are so just symbolic of that. And then the third thing that really rubbed me the wrong way with Alola was I've spoke about this before, the trial system. I do understand why they went with it, because it makes sense once again for the setting, but it just didn't do, like, it just wasn't as good as gym battles. It really wasn't. And the fact that, like, I guess I could also go into the region as a whole as a fourth point, because the region itself was all very linear, which is kind of crazy, because you have a 4-island system, which just in and of itself is not, there's nothing linear about that, but they made it very, very linear, to where you started on one island, you sort of looped around it, went to the next island, looped around, and just repeated that process, and you didn't even really get to travel between them. You did in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but that's besides the point. We're talking about Sun and Moon right now. So that was another issue that I had, and overall it just amounted to me just like not hating Sun and Moon. I certainly liked it better than I liked Gen 5 initially, but I was like, you know what, this isn't my favorite. And so those were the criticisms I had, and those were the thoughts that I had about both of those generations. And until, I would say, probably earlier this year even, I was like, yeah, that's how I feel. Gen 5, not so good. Gen 7, not so good. And that's just where I stood. But I think, like I said, I think it was a part of me just working on this Cardinal project and having that experience open my eyes up to, man, Game Freak really does know what they're doing. They put in a lot of work, because, like, I know I'm not a professional Pokemon designer by any means, but, like, I have studied the franchise for, like, 20 years, and I'm putting all of this knowledge I have, which is a lot of knowledge. I'm not here to toot my own horn or anything, but I do have a lot of knowledge about Pokemon. Like, I was fortunate enough to be there when the series started, and basically I've been a fan the whole time it's been around. So it's like I've been there and experienced all there is to experience as it came out. I didn't like jump in halfway through and backtrack and then follow it from there. I was there when it happened, and I've been there since, and I'm still here. So I felt like I had a lot of knowledge going into this, and I was just working really hard on this project that I was putting together. And a lot of times I kind of felt like I wasn't even coming close. And once again, I don't have a design. I'm not a designer, an artist, or anything like that. But it just opened my eyes to just how good the actual Pokemon designers are, because they have set a standard that is just like so unbelievably professional that they continue to hit every single generation, even if they try different things. And so I kind of started to think about, I guess I just started to think about things that I don't like in Pokemon, and Gen 5 naturally came to my mind. And I also have seen a lot of people who, like I said, Gen 5 is a generation that you either love or hate, and so I know there's a lot of people out there that love Gen 5. And so because I was starting to just like revisit my opinions and what I thought about things I disliked in the franchise, I thought about all those people who who love Gen 5, and started to just sort of, I guess, look at the other side of the coin. And obviously a lot of things, like the first like major positive that people talk about when they talk about Black and White and Generation 5 is the story. The story is definitely awesome. I would probably say I think I would personally say it's the second best story in Pokemon, which I know is probably going to be controversial. And I'd have to go back and play through Black and White again now to really affirm that, but just based on my initial experiences, I would say that I actually like Gen 5's story second to Sun and Moon's story, which I will get in later. I think Sun and Moon has an awesome story. But the story is really amazing in Black and White regardless, so that's one major positive. And kind of just from there, like I said, I just started to think about everything that Gen 5 has to offer. And once again, I had another epiphany of like, wow, Gen 5, there is actually a lot to really enjoy in Gen 5. You've got protagonists who are older than they have ever been, so they definitely went with a more mature vibe in Black and White, which is also reflected in the story, which is something that we've wanted forever, and we got it more than we ever have gotten it ever in Gen 5. So that is a huge point for Gen 5. And the region itself, I realized, like, it has a lot of what I ideally like in a region. Like, it's not necessarily my favorite, even after kind of like revisiting my opinion, it's still not my favorite, but it is the style of region I like the most. It's more of a land-based region, doesn't have a lot of water to it. It's got mountains, it's got cold weather, so it's got things that I personally like. And so I was like, wow, Univa's actually pretty cool. And another thing that I love about the Univa games that sort of just gets tossed to the side is that the post game is phenomenal. They leave you like 4 towns or something like that after you beat the game to just be able to go and explore. So there's a ton of new area to explore after you complete the game, and then you've got the quest of hunting down the 7 sages. It's so good, and it never gets talked about. And the post-game is a huge thing for me, and so that was a huge realization that I was just like, wow, why is no one talking about this? This is another great point about Black and White. And then the biggest issue that I had with Black and White, which once again was the Pokemon, I revisited that thought and just sort of started going through the Univa Pokedex in my mind. And while I still definitely feel that there are a bunch of bad Pokemon in Univa, like Klinklang and Herdier and just a bunch of other just unnecessary ones, I realized that there are actually so many that are good, which makes sense because they have there is 156 new Pokemon in Univa. So obviously just the sheer number of it all, there's going to be some bad ones, but that still leaves room for a bunch of good ones. You've got Zorua and Zoroark. You've got the Braviary line. You've got all the starters, which that is obviously very opinionated, but I believe all the starters are at least decent, if not really good. I think the Snivy line I think the starting forms of all of them are pretty good, I would say. I think Serperior is okay. It's never been my favorite, but I don't think it's bad. I think Emboar is pretty good. I'd say, yeah, just pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. And then Samurott is awesome. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I love Samurott. So the starters are pretty good. You've got Zorua, Zoroark. You've got the Swords of Justice, which are awesome. Reshiram, Zekrom, Kyurem. Those are amazing. There's just tons that I can't list them all right now, but there are a bunch of really good Pokemon in Univa, even if there are some not so good ones. So I just started thinking about that, and I was like, man, I don't think I gave Univa a fair shake in terms of its Pokedex, because I looked at the bad side of it, and as soon as I saw the bad side of it, that basically, I allowed that to become my opinion for the whole of the generation, essentially. And I didn't bother to look at the other side, and I think that's kind of the message that we can all take away from this, is that with whatever game you don't like, whatever generation is your least favorite, basically you see something that you don't like and you have a knee-jerk reaction, and it kind of just spoils the experience for you for the rest of the whole thing, because those first impressions are just such a big deal when it comes to like forming an overall opinion. So I think just like anyone, just if you revisit your opinion on whatever generation you like the least or whatever game you like the least, and you don't look at what you don't like, because you already know what you don't like, and you just start to think about the other sides of it. Like, there is a lot in every single generation that is to love. Like, they all obviously have things that they do wrong, I guess you could say, quote unquote, because there's no Pokemon game that's perfect, but every single one of them has so many things that are so good. And before we run out of time, we got to go to the Gen 7 side of this. And like I said, even though I didn't like the trials, and I thought the region was linear, and I thought the Pokemon were kind of wacky, and I didn't really like the tropicalness of it, I once again, I think the fact that we're basically almost 4 years removed from Sun and Moon also helps a lot as well. I think the fact, like, once you have some time to digest and sort of like process what you're looking at, I think you're able to make a much more educated opinion, and you're able to have much more you're able to have a lot more fair and well-evaluated thoughts about something when you're forming an opinion, because when you're doing it in the moment, it's like you get caught up in the hype and the excitement and everything else, and like that can definitely affect your opinion. But once time passes and things calm down and settle down, and you're really able to revisit that thing, that game, that generation with a level head, that makes a big difference, because having that level head can kind of just allow you to see it for what it is, instead of being affected by some emotional response that you had when the game was brand new and things were hyped up and stuff like that. And I think that is a big part of why I don't really like, I think Gen 5 is really good. I would say it's still one of my least favorite generations overall, but I will acknowledge it is really good, and there are a lot of things to absolutely love about it. And Gen 7, while once again one of my least favorite generations overall, there is a ton of good stuff here to absolutely love, and that's what we're about to get into. First off, when I revisited and rethought about the Pokedex, first off, first gut reaction was that I didn't like a lot of the Pokemon. I thought they were just sort of like, they just had that weird-ish, tropical, just wacky vibe to them. So they weren't my flavor of Pokemon. They weren't the style of Pokemon that I necessarily like. But as I started going through the Pokedex in my head once again, I realized that there are so many good Pokemon from Alola. First off, with the starters, even though I am still not a fan of Primarina or Incineroar, Decidueye is easily one of the coolest starter Pokemon ever. And I hated Decidueye when I first saw it in the leak. So I did a complete 180 on my opinion of it, just because I had the chance to see it in the games, experience it in gameplay, and then have some time removed from all that hubbub to where I could actually look at it and decide for myself. And all of that allowed me to realize that Decidueye is amazing. Like, I think that is the biggest change of opinion in Pokemon I've ever had, is about Decidueye, because I hated Decidueye, and now I love Decidueye to death. I think it's amazing. So you've got at least one amazing starter Pokemon, even if I still don't like the other two, but then you've got a bunch of really, really cool Pokemon, like Rockruff and Lycanroc. They are fantastic. You've got Komala. We got the first Koala Pokemon, and it's freaking incredible. You've got Solgaleo and Lunala. Are you kidding me? Like, Lunala is, like, pretty good. Like, it's definitely awesome, but, like, I like Solgaleo a lot more, and Solgaleo is, like, freaking cool. Solgaleo is awesome. So the legendaries are out of the park in Gen 7. Necrozma is amazing. Necrozma is awesome. The concept of the Ultra Beasts, even if the Ultra Beasts look really weird, they're kind of supposed to because they're aliens, and just the concept of Pokemon from different worlds and traveling to different worlds and different dimensions and all that stuff, like, yeah, it's a lot to take in. It's pretty crazy, but it also made the story of Sun and Moon awesome, and it's part of the reason why I think Gen 7 Sun and Moon story is the best story of them all, because you were dealing with intense stuff, you were dealing with interdimensional Pokemon and all that stuff, and you had a legendary Pokemon that was a part of it from the beginning, and then you had a big twist with finding out that Lusamine, the villain, was the mother of Gladion and Lily. And speaking of Gladion is sort of that edgy, just not really a douchebag, but just like a punk rival that we've wanted for so long. He was just the epitome of that, and he also had a legendary Pokemon and a backstory of his own to where he was really hardened and he stole this Pokemon, but then he, much like Silver actually, learned just compassion and friendship, and that's what allowed his type Null to evolve into Silvally, and he's got a whole team that's based around just basically friendship and them becoming stronger when he can actually show compassion. And so the story of Sun and Moon is actually really good, and the music as well adds to that. There's a great soundtrack with Sun and Moon. So ultimately, being a few years removed from the 7th generation, even though there were a lot of things I disliked about it, I was able to kind of go back into that opinion with a level head now that it's all said and done, and realize that there are a lot of things out there in Gen 7 that are worth just loving. Like, there are a lot of really good things that Game Freak deserves praise for with Gen 7, and that is the case for every generation. You want to say Gen 1 is bad because it's too plain and lame and it's boring. Well, you've got so many good things from Generation 1, whether it's the gym leaders, whether it's the rival Blue, whether it's the Pokemon themselves. There's just so many things about Generation 1 that are great, and Generation 2, same thing. People want to talk about the leveling system being jacked up and it being small because it has to share with Kanto. Well, guess what? The Pokemon are amazing. The fact that it's a sequel is awesome. Just the Johto region in general with its whole, like, Japanese old school vibe, like, it's amazing. The legendaries are amazing. The story it has itself is awesome. There's just, you can say that for every generation, and I think, like, even though we're completely allowed to have opinions about, like, generations or games that we dislike or hate or whatever the case may be, I think it's really important to realize the good in all of those same opinions as well, and realize the good things that, like, whatever thing it is that you dislike, it's good to realize the good in it as well, because, like, Game Freak obviously has so much pressure on themselves, and they, especially nowadays with the Sword and Shield era that we're in, they have gotten criticized a lot for a lot of different things, and they just have not gotten the benefit of the doubt for the past little while. And so I think it's important for us to give them a little more of the benefit of the doubt, because if you just sort of remove yourself from all the craziness and the hubbub and the commotion and just take all these games and generations for what they are, you will see a lot of really good things that are just really amazing. Like, and there's a lot to love in every single generation. Like, it is really honestly crazy how, like, professional the Pokemon games are in terms of their design and how they're made, and just, it's crazy how high the standard now is for the games, which is kind of why all of this just ridiculousness and criticism happens in the first place, because people have taken that ridiculously high standard for granted. Like, that's now the baseline. It's not the top of the mountain. It's now the bottom of the valley. Like, we're supposed to begin at this standard and go up, and not have this standard be like the basically like the end all be all. And the fact that we've sort of taken that for granted, I think it's definitely something as fans that we need to reevaluate, and we need to kind of just show some appreciation for all of the super awesome things that we have gotten in the games over the years that we might have just not really taken the time to appreciate, or that we have taken for granted. So that is my hot take. That is my 2 cents. That is the lesson for today. But with that, we are out of time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Hopefully you took something away from it. You got my message. At the end of the day, like I said, your opinion is your opinion, and you're allowed to have it, but take a moment to look at the other side of the coin on that opinion at the same time, and you might just find some stuff that you really enjoy. But with that being said, if you guys liked this podcast, be sure to leave a like wherever you're listening. If you're on YouTube, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to follow as well wherever you are, because we do this every single Friday. It's a lot of fun. And I will be back next Friday as well with another episode that's just going to be great. So with that being said, I do need to give one more quick shout out to all of our sponsors before we go. Tax Defense Group, be sure to check them out for all your tax needs at the taxdefensegroup.com. Call them 800-850-7973. Writer Junkie, if you need to get a website set up or anything like that, check them out at writerjunkie.com. 805-587-7966 is the number. And we got our UCast Studios website up, so be sure to check that out. You can access all the Pokeblock Podcast stuff from there as well. Be sure to give that a look if you're interested. And so, yeah, I'll be back next Friday. It's going to be awesome. We'll have a great subject for you guys. A lot of great stuff to talk about as well. Man, I feel like I'm botching this outro. TLDR, I'll be back next Friday with another awesome podcast. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, a great week, and until the next one, as always, I love you, and I will smell you guys later.